The coffee shop buzzed with the usual morning chatter as Sarah Mitchell sat in the corner booth, her fingers wrapped around a warm ceramic mug. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything extraordinary. To the other patrons, she was just another woman in her early 30s, perhaps a teacher or an office worker grabbing breakfast before heading to work. At the table across from her sat 3 men in expensive suits, their voices growing louder with each passing minute. They were business executives from a tech company, celebrating a recent deal. One of them, a tall man with slicked-back hair named Derek, had been making increasingly condescending remarks about women in the military. "I'm just saying," Derek announced to his colleagues, loud enough for half the coffee shop to hear, "women don't belong in combat roles. It's basic biology. They don't have the physical strength or the mental toughness for real warfare." His companion, a shorter man with glasses, nodded along. "Exactly. Put them behind a desk, sure. But flying attack helicopters? Operating heavy machinery in combat? That's a man's job." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her eyes on her coffee. She had heard this speech before, countless times, in countless variations. After 12 years in the Army, 6 of them flying Apache helicopters in some of the most dangerous combat zones in the world, she had learned when to speak up and when to let ignorance reveal itself. The third man at the table seemed less certain. "I don't know, guys. I read about some pretty impressive female pilots. That story about the woman who saved an entire convoy in Afghanistan." Derek cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Media exaggeration. Propaganda to make people feel good about diversity quotas. In real combat, when bullets are flying and lives are on the line, you need someone with real capability, not someone who got their position because of political correctness." Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee. The barista, a young woman named Maya who had served Sarah many times before, caught her eye and raised an eyebrow. Maya had seen Sarah's military ID when she paid and knew there was more to this quiet customer than met the eye. Derek continued his monologue, apparently emboldened by the attention he was receiving. "I have a friend who's an Army recruiter. He told me they've lowered standards across the board just to get women into combat positions. It's making our military weaker, not stronger. In a real firefight, those women would freeze up or get everyone killed." The coffee shop had grown quieter now. Several other customers were listening, some nodding along with Derek's words, others looking uncomfortable. Sarah noticed an elderly man in the corner, wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, shaking his head slowly. "You know what really gets me?" Derek went on, warming to his subject. "These women want all the glory and recognition, but they couldn't handle one day of what real soldiers go through. They want to play soldier, but when things get serious, they'll be calling for a man to save them." Sarah set down her coffee cup with a gentle clink. She had tried to ignore the conversation, tried to enjoy her rare day off in peace. But something in Derek's tone, the absolute certainty, the complete dismissal of women she had served with, women who had bled and died for their country, finally pushed her past her limit. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. At 5'6", she wasn't imposing in stature, but there was something in the way she carried herself that drew attention. She walked over to Derek's table, her expression neutral. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." Derek looked up, a smug smile already forming on his face. He clearly thought he had attracted an admirer or perhaps someone who wanted to argue with him, which he seemed to relish. "Oh, I know this might not be popular opinion, but someone has to speak the truth about. I flew Apache helicopters," Sarah interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying clearly through the now silent coffee shop. "For 6 years. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq." The smile on Derek's face faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Well, that's great. Thank you for your service and all that. But I'm talking about real combat situations, not Helmand Province, 2019, Sarah continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "My unit was providing close air support for a convoy that had been ambushed by Taliban forces. 42 soldiers pinned down in a kill zone. The convoy commander was a woman, by the way, Captain Jennifer Ross. She kept her people alive for 37 minutes under sustained fire until air support arrived." Derek shifted in his seat, looking less comfortable now. His colleagues had stopped smiling. Other customers were openly listening now, some pulling out their phones. Sarah's voice remained even, almost conversational, but there was steel beneath it. I was the air support that arrived. My co-pilot was also a woman, Lieutenant Amy Chun. We flew into a hot landing zone, multiple enemy positions with heavy weapons. We had 8 minutes to neutralize the threat before the convoy ran out of ammunition. Look, I'm sure you did your best, but Derek tried to interject. 15 confirmed targets, Sarah said, cutting him off again. Destroyed in 8 minutes. 3 heavy machine gun nests, 2 mortar positions, for sniper positions, and 6 armed vehicles. My weapons officer was a woman too, Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez. She didn't miss a single shot. The coffee shop was completely silent now. Derek's face had gone from smug to pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on the back of an empty chair. You mentioned women freezing up in combat. Captain Ross took shrapnel in her leg and kept directing her troops. Lieutenant Chin flew our Apache through a sandstorm with visibility under 200 feet while taking ground fire. Sergeant Rodriguez operated her weapons system while we were pulling 4GS in evasive maneuvers. I didn't see anyone freeze. I didn't mean to suggest, Derek started weakly. Yes, you did, Sarah said, her voice still quiet but firm. You suggested that women aren't capable of real combat, that we get special treatment, that we get people killed. You suggested this loudly, in a public place, with complete confidence, despite apparently having zero actual combat experience yourself. Derek's colleagues were now studying their coffee cups with intense interest, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. The man with glasses had actually scooted his chair slightly away from Derek. Sarah straightened up. The 42 soldiers in that convoy all made it home. 26 of them were men, 16 were women. They all fought, they all bled, and they all survived because everyone did their job, regardless of gender. Captain Ross received the Silver Star for her actions that day. Lieutenant Chun and I both received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Sergeant Rodriguez got the Bronze Star with valor. She paused, letting the words sink in. The elderly veteran in the corner was nodding, a slight smile on his weathered face. But you're right about one thing, Sarah continued, her tone softening slightly. Standards matter. We should have the best people in every position, regardless of gender. What you're wrong about is assuming that the best automatically means male. Some of the best pilots I've ever flown with were women. Some of the worst were men. Competence isn't determined by chromosomes. Derek finally found his voice, though it was much quieter than before. I apologize if I offended you. I was just expressing an opinion based on what I've heard, based on assumptions and stereotypes, Sarah corrected gently. Not based on facts or experience. That's the problem. People make sweeping judgments about things they've never experienced, about people they've never met, and they do it with complete confidence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card, placing it on the table in front of Derek. It was her military ID, showing her rank as Chief Warrant Officer 3 and her designation as an Apache pilot. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I flew the AH-64D Apache Longbow for 6 years in active combat. I've logged over 1,500 combat hours. I've been shot at more times than I can count. I've saved lives, and I've taken lives when necessary to protect my fellow soldiers. I've done all of this while being a woman, and somehow managed not to get anyone killed through my supposed incompetence. Derek picked up the ID with shaking hands, looked at it, and set it down carefully. His face was now completely red. I'm sorry. I really am. I was talking about things I don't understand. That's the most honest thing you've said this morning, Sarah said, picking up her ID and returning it to her pocket. Maybe next time, before you make broad declarations about who's capable of what, you might consider that the person sitting next to you might have actually done the thing you're claiming is impossible. She turned to walk back to her table, but Derek spoke up again, his voice barely above a whisper. Can I ask you something? Sarah turned back. Go ahead. What was it like? Flying into that situation, knowing what you were facing. For the first time, Sarah's expression softened into something almost like a smile. Terrifying. Every single time. Fear doesn't care about your gender. What matters is what you do with that fear. Do you let it control you, Or do you push through it to do what needs to be done? I've seen men and women both succeed and fail at that test. It's not about what you are. It's about who you are. She walked back to her table, where her coffee had gone cold. Maya, the barista, appeared almost instantly with a fresh cup. On the house, she said with a warm smile. That was incredible. Sarah shook her head. Just stating facts. People need to hear them sometimes. As she sat down, several other customers approached her table. The Vietnam veteran came first, extending a weathered hand. Master Sergeant Tom Bradley, retired. I served with some damn fine female soldiers in my day. Thank you for setting that young man straight. A middle-aged woman was next, tears in her eyes. My daughter just enlisted. She wants to be a pilot. Thank you for showing her it's possible. One by one, people came by to shake her hand, thank her for her service, or simply nod in respect. Sarah accepted it all with grace, though she was clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Across the coffee shop, Derek and his colleagues gathered their things to leave. As they passed Sarah's table, Derek stopped. I really am sorry, he said, looking her in the eye for the first time. You're right. I was talking about things I didn't understand. I'll do better. Sarah nodded. We all should. Understanding comes from listening, not assuming. After they left, the coffee shop gradually returned to its normal buzz of conversation. Sarah finished her fresh coffee, left a generous tip for Maya, and headed for the door. The elderly veteran caught up with her in the parking lot. You handled that well, Chief Warrant Officer. Better than I would have, probably. Sarah smiled. I've had practice. That wasn't the first time I've heard those opinions, and it won't be the last. Probably not, Tom agreed. But maybe you changed one mind today. That's worth something. Maybe, Sarah said. I hope so. Sarah remembered every detail of that mission as if it had happened yesterday, even though 3 years had passed. The morning had started like any other at Forward Operating Base Chapman. She and Amy had been scheduled for a routine patrol, flying a wide circuit around the base perimeter to check for insurgent activity. The Apache had been prepped and ready, all systems showing green. They had been airborne for about 40 minutes when the call came through. A convoy of supply trucks and troop carriers had been ambushed on Route Copper, a notoriously dangerous stretch of road that wound through a narrow valley. The Taliban had chosen their ambush site well, positioning forces on the high ground on both sides of the road, creating a devastating crossfire. Viper 2-3, this is Ground Hammer 6. The radio had crackled with urgency. The voice belonged to Captain Jennifer Ross, the convoy commander. We are under heavy fire from multiple positions, requesting immediate air support. We have casualties and are running low on ammunition. Sarah and Amy had exchanged a glance. They were the closest air asset, but they were also alone. Standard procedure called for Apache attack helicopters to operate in pairs, providing mutual support and additional firepower. But there was no time to wait for backup. The convoy was in immediate danger. Ground Hammer 6, this is Viper 2-3, Sarah had responded, her voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through her system. We are 5 minutes out from your position. Transmit coordinates and enemy positions. Amy had already turned the Apache toward the convoy's location, pushing the helicopter to its maximum speed. The powerful twin engines screamed as they raced across the Afghan landscape, the desert floor blurring beneath them. Captain Ross's voice came back, strained but controlled. Viper 2-3, we have enemy positions on both sides of the valley. Estimate 20 to 30 fighters with small arms, RPGs, and at least 2 heavy machine guns. We also have confirmed mortar positions approximately 400 meters north of our location. In the back seat of the Apache, Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was already working her magic. As the weapons officer, Maria controlled the helicopter's formidable arsenal, a 30mm chain gun, Hydra 70 rockets, and Hellfire missiles. Her job was to identify targets and eliminate them with surgical precision, all while the helicopter maneuvered through 3-dimensional space at high speed. I'm pulling up drone footage of the area, Maria reported, her fingers flying across her console. Confirmed visual on the convoy. They're completely pinned down. I count at least 3 disabled vehicles. Sarah's mind raced through the tactical situation. The convoy was in a narrow valley with high ground on both sides, creating a textbook kill zone. The Taliban fighters had the advantage of position and cover. The convoy had limited ammunition and nowhere to go. Every second counted. Amy, we're going to come in from the south, Sarah decided. Keep us low and use the terrain to mask our approach. Maria, prioritize the heavy weapons first. Those machine guns are doing the most damage. Copy that. Both women responded simultaneously. As they approached the valley, Sarah could see the smoke rising from burning vehicles. The sound of gunfire carried even over the roar of the Apache's engines. Through her targeting system, she could see the convoy vehicles scattered along the road, troops taking cover behind them, returning fire as best they could. The Taliban had clearly been planning this ambush for some time. Their positions were well fortified, using natural rock formations and hastily constructed barriers for cover. They had timed the attack perfectly, hitting the convoy at the narrowest point in the valley where escape was impossible. Viper 2-3, this is Ground Hammer 6. Captain Ross's voice came through again, more urgent now. We have multiple wounded. Medical evac cannot land until you clear the area. Please advise on your ETA. 30 seconds, Ground Hammer 6, Sarah responded. Get your people's heads down. We're coming in hot. Amy brought the Apache screaming over a ridgeline, dropping into the valley at a steep angle that would have terrified most pilots. But she had done this hundreds of times before, in both training and combat. Her hands were steady on the controls, her eyes scanning for threats. I have multiple targets, Maria announced, starting with the eastern machine gun nest. Acquiring lock. The Apache's 30mm chain gun roared to life, spitting out armor-piercing rounds at a rate of over 600 per minute. The first heavy machine gun position disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. Before the echo had faded, Maria had already shifted to the second target. Western machine gun nest, engaging now, she called out. The second position suffered the same fate as the first. In less than 10 seconds, Maria had eliminated the two most dangerous threats to the convoy. But there were still dozens of enemy fighters scattered across the valley slopes, and they were now turning their attention to the Apache. Tracers filled the air around them as the Taliban fighters opened up with everything they had. An RPG streaked past the cockpit, missing by less than 20 feet. Amy threw the Apache into a hard turn, using the helicopter's agility to evade the incoming fire. Multiple shooters, 9 o'clock, Amy called out, her voice tight with concentration. Sarah could see them now through her targeting system, a group of 5 or 6 fighters positioned behind a rock outcropping, firing AK-47s and an RPG launcher. They were too close to the convoy for a Hellfire missile. The blast radius would risk hitting friendly forces. It would have to be the chain gun. I've got them, Maria confirmed. The gun swiveled with computerized precision, and another burst of 30mm rounds turned the rock outcropping into a kill zone. The enemy fire from that position ceased immediately, but for every position they eliminated, it seemed like 2 more opened up. The Taliban fighters were determined and well-prepared. Sarah realized they were running out of time. The convoy was still under heavy fire, and they couldn't keep this up indefinitely. Maria, what's the status on those mortar positions? Sarah asked. I have a lock on the primary position, Maria responded. 400 meters north, behind that hill mass. Looks like they have at least 2 tubes set up. Hellfire is armed and ready. Take it, Sarah ordered. The Hellfire missile launched with a whoosh, leaving a trail of smoke as it arced toward the target. The missile's advanced guidance system, controlled by Maria, steered it directly onto the mortar position. The explosion was massive, sending a secondary blast skyward as the Taliban's ammunition stockpile cooked off. Direct hit, Maria confirmed. Mortar position destroyed. Captain Ross's voice came through the radio, audible relief breaking through her professional composure. Viper 2-3, that was beautiful. Mortar fire has ceased. We still have multiple small arms positions on both ridges. Sarah assessed the situation quickly. They had taken out the heavy weapons, but there were still at least a dozen enemy positions scattered across the valley slopes. They could engage each one individually with the chain gun, but that would take time the convoy didn't have. They needed a different approach. Amy, can you give me a firing run along the eastern ridge? Sarah asked. Amy didn't hesitate. Copy. Starting my approach now. The Apache banked hard, lining up parallel to the eastern ridge where several enemy positions were clustered together. This was one of the most dangerous maneuvers in combat aviation, flying straight and level while under fire, making yourself a predictable target. But it was also the most effective way to deliver maximum firepower on multiple targets. Hydra rockets armed and ready, Maria reported. Acquiring targets. Fire when ready, Sarah confirmed. The rocket pods erupted, sending a salvo of 1970mm rockets streaking toward the eastern ridge. The Hydra rockets were less precise than the Hellfire missiles, but they didn't need to be. They saturated an area with explosive force, perfect for eliminating multiple positions at once. The eastern ridge disappeared in a rolling series of explosions. Rocks, dirt, and debris flew into the air. When the smoke cleared, the enemy fire from that side of the valley had been reduced to scattered, sporadic shots. "Break left," Amy suddenly shouted, throwing the Apache into a violent turn. An RPG flashed through the space where they had been a split second before. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. They weren't done yet. "Western Ridge still has active shooters," Maria called out. "Running low on Hydra rockets. I have 6 remaining. 6 rockets. Probably a dozen enemy positions left." Sarah made a quick calculation. They couldn't afford another full rocket barrage. They would have to be more selective, using the chain gun for most targets and saving the remaining rockets for clustered positions. "Amy, swing us around for a pass on the western ridge," Sarah ordered. "Maria, conserve those rockets. Use the gun on individual targets." For the next 3 minutes, they worked like a precision machine. Amy flew the Apache through a deadly ballet of maneuvers, positioning them for optimal firing angles while dodging incoming fire. Maria's targeting was flawless, each burst from the chain gun finding its mark. Sarah coordinated with Captain Ross on the ground, ensuring they didn't hit too close to friendly positions. One by one, the enemy positions fell silent. A sniper nest built into a cave mouth. A group of fighters behind a stone wall. An RPG team trying to set up on a ridge. Each threat was identified, engaged, and eliminated. "Viper 2-3, we have movement in the northern approach," Captain Ross reported. "Looks like reinforcements trying to flank our position." Sarah's jaw tightened. The Taliban weren't giving up. They were trying to bring in more fighters to continue the attack. She checked her ammunition status. They were running low on everything. The chain gun had maybe 30 seconds of continuous fire left. The Hydra rockets were down to their last 6. They had 1 Hellfire missile remaining. "Maria, can you get eyes on those reinforcements?" Sarah asked. Switching to thermal imaging, Maria responded. After a moment, she continued, "I have them. Looks like 2 technical vehicles, heavy machine guns mounted in the beds. They're approaching fast on the northern road. Estimate 1 minute until they're in firing position." 2 vehicles with heavy weapons would devastate the convoys if the missile struck the road with devastating precision, cratering the surface and sending a massive shockwave outward. The lead vehicle, traveling at high speed, hit the crater and flipped end over end, its momentum carrying it directly into the path of the second vehicle. The collision was catastrophic. Both vehicles erupted in flames as their fuel tanks ruptured, and the ammunition for their mounted weapons cooked off in a secondary explosion that lit up the valley. "Direct hit," Maria exclaimed. Both vehicles destroyed. No movement detected. On the ground, the convoy erupted in cheers that Sarah could hear even over the radio. Captain Ross's voice came through, choked with emotion and relief. "Viper 2-3, you just saved our lives. Enemy fire has ceased. We are secure." Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe, her hands still gripping the controls tightly. They had done it. 8 minutes of the most intense combat flying of her career, but they had done it. Every member of that convoy would be going home because of those 8 minutes. "Ground Hammer 6, what's your status on casualties?" Sarah asked, forcing her mind back to the immediate situation. The fight might be over, but her job wasn't done yet. "We have 7 wounded, 3 critical," Captain Ross responded. "Requesting immediate medical evacuation." "Copy that. We'll provide overwatch until medevac arrives," Sarah confirmed. She switched to the tactical frequency to request medical helicopters, then turned to her crew. "Good work, both of you. Maria, that last shot was incredible." "Thanks, Chief," Maria responded, though Sarah could hear the tremor in her voice now that the immediate danger had passed. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the shakes, and the realization of how close they had all come to disaster. Amy was circling the valley now, slower and higher, scanning for any remaining threats. Her hands were finally showing a slight tremor on the controls. "I think I aged about 10 years in those 8 minutes," she said with a shaky laugh. Sarah understood exactly how she felt. Every combat mission took something out of you, left you changed in ways that were hard to explain to people who had never experienced it. But they had trained for this, prepared for this. And when the moment came, all 3 of them had performed flawlessly. The medical evacuation helicopters arrived within 15 minutes, protected by 2 more Apache helicopters that had scrambled from the base as soon as word of the ambush reached them. Sarah and Amy maintained their position, watching as the wounded were loaded aboard the medevac birds and flown to safety. As the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, the convoy finally began moving again. The damaged vehicles were secured or destroyed, the dead enemy fighters left for local forces to deal with, and the mission continued toward its destination. Captain Ross's final transmission to Sarah was brief but heartfelt. "Viper 2-3, I don't have adequate words to thank you. You and your crew saved 42 lives today. We won't forget it. Just doing our job, ground hammer 6, Sarah had responded, though the words felt inadequate. "Stay safe out there." The flight back to base had been quiet, each woman lost in her own thoughts. They had burned through almost their entire ammunition load and pushed both themselves and their aircraft to the absolute limit. But they had succeeded. That was what mattered. The debriefing had lasted hours. Sarah, Amy, and Maria had walked their commanders through every second of the engagement, explaining their decisions and actions. The gun camera footage showed everything in stark detail: the precision of their targeting, the effectiveness of their tactics, the desperate nature of the fight. Now, sitting in her living room 3 years later, watching the coffee shop video go viral on social media, Sarah thought about how that one mission had crystallized everything she had learned during her years of service. Combat didn't care about gender. Bullets didn't discriminate. When lives were on the line, all that mattered was competence, training, and the will to act. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed it was Colonel Marcus Henderson, her former commanding officer. Sarah smiled as she answered. "Good afternoon, sir." "Sarah Mitchell, you sure know how to make a scene." Henderson's gruff voice came through, though she could hear the amusement in his tone. "I've had 3 reporters call me today, asking for comment on that coffee shop incident. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to create a situation. It just happened. Don't apologize. You handled it well. Better than that loudmouth deserved, frankly." Henderson paused. "Listen, I'm actually calling about something else. Are you still interested in that consulting position we discussed?" Sarah sat up straighter. She and Henderson had talked a few months ago about the possibility of her working as a consultant, helping to train the next generation of Apache pilots. She had expressed interest, but hadn't expected it to move forward so quickly. "Yes, sir, absolutely. What's the timeline?" "Sooner than I thought. Your little viral video has actually helped in an unexpected way. The Army is getting serious about improving recruitment and retention of female aviators, and your name came up in several meetings. They want someone with real combat experience who can speak credibly about what it takes to succeed in this field." Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. This could be her chance to make a real difference, to help other women navigate the same challenges she had faced. What would the position entail? Training, mentoring, public speaking, curriculum development. You'd be working with pilot candidates at Fort Rucker, but also traveling to bases around the country to speak with current aviators and help refine our training programs. It's a civilian position, so you'd have more flexibility than active duty, but you'd still be making a significant impact. When would I need to start? Can you be at Fort Rucker next month for an orientation session? The formal position would start about 2 months after that, but we want to get you integrated into the program as soon as possible. Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll be there, sir." After the call ended, Sarah sat back, a smile spreading across her face. The coffee shop confrontation had been uncomfortable, but maybe some good would come from it after all. if her story could inspire other women to pursue their dreams in aviation, if she could help create an environment where female pilots were judged solely on their abilities rather than their gender, then it would all be worth it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Did Henderson call you? Just got off the phone with him. Looks like we're going to be working together again." Sarah's smile widened. Amy had apparently been offered a similar consulting position. Having her former co-pilot involved would make the work even better. They had always made a great team. Maria sent a message shortly after. "Heard about the Fort Rucker gig. Congratulations. You're going to be amazing at it. Those new pilots are lucky to have you as a mentor." As the day progressed, Sarah received messages from dozens of people. Former comrades from her various deployments, pilots she had trained with, even some of the soldiers from that convoy 3 years ago who had seen the video and recognized her name. The common theme in all the messages was support and gratitude. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from an unexpected source. It was an email from a high school student named Jessica who had seen the coffee shop video. "Dear Ms. Mitchell," the email began. "I'm a junior in high school, and I've wanted to be a military pilot since I was 8 years old. But my guidance counselor told me I should consider other careers because piloting combat aircraft is too demanding for women. I've been discouraged and confused, wondering if my dream was unrealistic. Then, I saw your video today. You didn't just talk about what you did, you proved it. You showed that women can not only fly attack helicopters, but can excel at it. You gave me hope that my dream is possible. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for serving our country. And thank you for showing girls like me that we can do anything we set our minds to." Sarah read the email 3 times, feeling tears prick at her eyes. This was why she had spoken up in that coffee shop. Not for herself, but for girls like Jessica who needed to know that their dreams were valid, that their aspirations weren't limited by their gender. She composed a careful response, sharing some of her own journey and offering encouragement. She included resources about military aviation programs, suggestions for preparation, and her own email address if Jessica ever had questions. It took her nearly an hour to write, but she wanted to get it right. Over the next few days, similar emails arrived by the dozens. Young women who had been discouraged from pursuing careers in aviation or the military. Parents of daughters who wanted their children to see positive role models. Even some young men who wrote to say that the video had made them reconsider their own assumptions about women in combat. Sarah tried to respond to each message personally, though it quickly became overwhelming. She ended up creating a detailed FAQ document that she could send to people, covering common questions about becoming a military pilot, dealing with discrimination, and succeeding in male-dominated fields. The media attention was more challenging to navigate. Not every woman in the military had been so lucky, and Sarah felt a growing responsibility to use her platform to advocate for change. She began reaching out to organizations that supported women in the military, offering to speak at events and help with fundraising. She connected with researchers studying gender integration in combat units, sharing her experiences and insights. She even testified before a congressional committee examining military personnel policies. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. Sarah found herself traveling constantly, speaking to groups ranging from middle school students to senior military officers. Each audience presented different challenges and opportunities. The students needed inspiration and information about career paths. The officers needed data and strategic arguments about effectiveness and readiness. One particular speaking engagement stood out in Sarah's memory. She had been invited to address the incoming class at West Point, the prestigious military academy. The auditorium was filled with hundreds of young cadets, their faces eager and attentive. Sarah had spent days preparing her remarks, wanting to strike the right balance between honesty about the challenges they would face and optimism about what they could achieve. She began by telling them about her own journey. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker and a nurse, watching military aircraft fly overhead and dreaming of being a pilot. Joining ROTC in college despite her parents' concerns. The grueling training at Fort Rucker where she learned to fly helicopters. The additional specialized training to become an Apache pilot. She talked about the doubt she had faced, both external and internal. The instructors who questioned whether she had the physical strength to handle the Apache's controls during extended missions. The fellow pilots who assumed she had gotten her slot through preferential treatment rather than merit. Her own moments of uncertainty when the training seemed impossibly difficult. But she also talked about perseverance, about studying harder than anyone else to master the systems and tactics, about spending extra hours in the simulator until every procedure was second nature, about building trust with her crews through consistent performance and reliability. Then, she told them about combat. Not glorified or sanitized, but real. The fear that never completely went away, even after dozens of missions. The weight of responsibility when lives depended on your decisions. The bonds formed with fellow soldiers who trusted you with their lives. The satisfaction of protecting people, of making a difference, of serving something larger than yourself. She concluded with the lesson that had become central to her message. Some of you will face doubt because of your gender, your race, your background, or other factors beyond your control. The question is not whether you will face these challenges. The question is how you will respond. Will you let others' limitations define your potential? Or will you prove through your actions that their assumptions were wrong? The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Afterward, dozens of cadets lined up to speak with her, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. Sarah stayed for hours, talking with each one, offering encouragement and practical guidance. Among the cadets who approached her was a young woman named Rachel Torres. She introduced herself nervously, clutching a worn notebook. Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you. Your story means everything to me. I'm planning to branch aviation, and my goal is to fly Apaches just like you did. Sarah smiled warmly. That's an excellent goal. What year are you? I'm a plebe, ma'am. First year. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to making it happen. Tell me about your preparation. Have you done any flight training yet? Rachel's face lit up as she explained her background. She had earned her private pilot's license in high school, had excelled in her physics and mathematics courses, and was already studying Apache tactics and systems in her free time. Her dedication was evident, and Sarah was impressed. You're on the right track, Sarah told her. Keep focusing on the fundamentals. Master the academics, stay in top physical condition, and build strong relationships with your classmates. The technical skills are important, but so is the ability to work as part of a team. They talked for nearly 20 minutes, with Sarah offering specific advice about the aviation track at West Point and what to expect during flight school. As their conversation wound down, Rachel hesitated, then asked, Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Did you ever doubt yourself? Even after you had proven you could do it, did you still have moments where you wondered if you belonged? Sarah appreciated the honesty of the question. Yes, absolutely. Even after successful missions, even after earning awards and recognition, there were times when I questioned myself. That's human nature. The key is not letting those doubts paralyze you. You acknowledge them, you address them through preparation and training, and then you move forward. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. I guess I was worried that once I became a pilot, all the doubts would disappear. It's good to know that even experienced pilots still deal with that. Everyone does, Sarah assured her. Confidence comes from competence, and competence comes from continuous learning and improvement. Never stop growing, never stop questioning, and never stop striving to be better. As Sarah finally left the academy that evening, she felt energized despite the long day. Talking with cadets like Rachel reminded her why this work mattered. Each person she inspired, each barrier she helped break down, each assumption she challenged with facts and evidence was a step toward a better, more inclusive military. The following month, Sarah began her formal work at Fort Rucker. The pilot training program was intense, designed to push candidates to their limits and beyond. Sarah's role was multifaceted. She observed training flights, provided feedback to instructors, mentored struggling students, and helped develop new curriculum based on lessons learned from recent combat operations. What struck her most was the diversity of the current class of pilot candidates. There were more women than she had seen during her own training, representing about 15% of the class. There were also candidates from a wide range of ethnic and economic backgrounds. The military was changing, slowly but steadily. But old attitudes persisted among some instructors and students. Sarah witnessed conversations similar to what she had heard in the coffee shop, assumptions about who could or couldn't handle the demands of combat aviation. She addressed these incidents directly but tactfully, using data and examples rather than confrontation. One instructor, a former Apache pilot named Captain Brad Stevens, was particularly skeptical of the push for greater diversity in aviation. He made his views known during a staff meeting, arguing that lowering standards to achieve diversity goals would compromise mission effectiveness. Sarah listened carefully to his concerns, then responded, "Captain Stevens, I appreciate your commitment to maintaining high standards. That's absolutely critical. But I'd like to challenge one of your underlying assumptions. You're assuming that increased diversity means lowered standards. My experience suggests otherwise." She pulled up a presentation on her tablet, displaying data she had compiled. These are completion rates for flight school over the past 15 years, broken down by gender. The gap has narrowed significantly, and the current female completion rate is within 3 percentage points of the male rate. This suggests that women who enter the program are just as capable of completing it successfully. Stevens frowned at the data. But what about physical requirements? Flying an Apache is physically demanding, especially during combat operations. You're right, it is demanding, Sarah agreed. But physical strength is only one component. Let me show you something else. She displayed another chart. These are performance evaluations from recent combat deployments, comparing male and female Apache pilots across several metrics: mission completion rates, accuracy, communication effectiveness, and crew coordination. The differences are statistically insignificant. Another instructor, Major Lisa Pham, chimed in. "I think what Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell is highlighting is that our assumptions about what makes a good pilot don't always align with the actual data. We need to focus on the competencies that truly matter, not on stereotypes about physical capability." The discussion continued for another hour, with Sarah presenting more evidence and fielding questions. By the end, even Stevens seemed somewhat convinced, or at least willing to keep an open mind. "I appreciate you backing up your arguments with data," he admitted. "I still have concerns, but you've given me something to think about." It was a small victory, but Sarah had learned that changing minds was often a gradual process. Seeds planted today might not bear fruit until months or years later. Her work with individual students was equally challenging and rewarding. One of her ments was a young woman named Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who was struggling with the Apache's weapons systems. Kim was an excellent pilot, smooth and confident at the controls, but she couldn't seem to master the complex targeting and engagement procedures required of the weapons officer. Sarah worked with Kim privately, breaking down each procedure into smaller, more manageable steps. She discovered that Kim was a visual learner who struggled with the traditional text-based instruction manuals. Together, they created visual guides and flowcharts that mapped out each procedure step by step. "This makes so much more sense," Kim said during one of their sessions, her relief evident. "I was trying to memorize everything sequentially, but seeing it laid out visually helps me understand the relationships between different steps." "Everyone learns differently," Sarah explained. "The key is finding the method that works for you, not forcing yourself to learn the way everyone else does." Within 2 weeks, Kim's performance on the weapons systems had improved dramatically. She went from near the bottom of her class to the top third. More importantly, she regained the confidence that had been eroding under the pressure of repeated failures. Stories like Kim's reinforced Sarah's belief that success in aviation wasn't about fitting a particular mold. It was about identifying each person's strengths, addressing their weaknesses, and providing the support they needed to excel. Sarah also found herself counseling students who faced discrimination or harassment. Some of the incidents were subtle, microaggressions that individually seemed minor but cumulatively created a hostile environment. Others were more overt, clear violations of military policy that required formal intervention. One particularly troubling case involved a female student named Lieutenant Maria Gonzalez, who reported that several male students had been making inappropriate comments about her appearance and questioning her abilities. The comments had escalated to the point where Gonzalez was considering dropping out of the program. The incident with Gonzalez reinforced something Sarah had learned throughout her career. Changing culture required constant vigilance and willingness to confront uncomfortable situations. It wasn't enough to have policies on paper. Those policies had to be enforced consistently, and people had to know that reporting problems would lead to action rather than retaliation. As the months passed, Sarah's influence at Fort Rucker grew. She became known as someone students could trust, someone who would listen to their concerns and advocate for them when necessary. But she also developed a reputation for high standards and honest feedback. She wasn't interested in coddling anyone or lowering expectations. Her goal was to ensure that every student who graduated was truly ready for the demands of combat aviation. The coffee shop incident, which had started this new chapter in Sarah's life, had largely faded from public attention. The viral video was old news, replaced by newer controversies and trending topics. But its impact continued to ripple outward in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. She received a letter from Derek, the man she had confronted in the coffee shop. It was handwritten, several pages long, and clearly written with considerable thought and reflection. Dear Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell, it began. I've started this letter a dozen times, struggling to find the right words. I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what I said to you that day in the coffee shop. I owe you an apology for every assumption I've made, every stereotype I've perpetuated, every time I've dismissed someone's capabilities based on factors beyond their control. That morning, you could have simply humiliated me and walked away. Instead, you treated me with more respect than I deserved. You educated me, challenged me, and gave me an opportunity to learn. I've spent the past months thinking about our encounter and doing research on women in combat roles. What I've learned has been eye-opening and humbling. I've read accounts from female pilots, soldiers, and Marines. I've studied the data on performance and effectiveness. I've talked to veterans who served alongside women in combat. Everything I've learned has confirmed what you tried to tell me. That capability isn't determined by gender, and that my assumptions were not only wrong but harmful. I want you to know that I've made changes in my own life. I've called out similar comments when I've heard them from colleagues. I've spoken to my daughters about your story and about the importance of judging people as individuals rather than as members of groups. I've tried to become the kind of person who builds people up rather than tearing them down based on prejudice. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not writing this to make myself feel better. I'm writing to let you know that your words had an impact, that you changed at least one person's mind that day. Thank you for your service, your patience, and your willingness to educate someone who didn't deserve your time or consideration. The letter was signed simply Derek Miller. Sarah read the letter twice, then set it aside with mixed emotions. She was glad that Derek had learned from the experience, that he was making an effort to change. But she also felt the weight of all the women who had faced similar dismissals without the opportunity to respond, who had been quietly discouraged from pursuing their dreams, whose talents had been wasted because of the Derek Millers of the world. She composed a brief response, acknowledging his letter and encouraging him to continue learning and growing. It felt like the right thing to do, to offer grace to someone who was genuinely trying to do better. Amy arrived at Fort Rucker the following week to begin her own work as a consultant. She and Sarah celebrated their reunion over dinner at a local restaurant, swapping stories about their experiences since leaving active duty. I've been doing some speaking engagements, Amy shared, mostly at STEM conferences and women's leadership events. It's been interesting, but I miss the hands-on work. I'm excited to get back to actually training pilots. It's rewarding work, Sarah assured her. Challenging at times, but definitely worthwhile. You're going to be great at it. They discussed their plans for the training program, sharing ideas about curriculum improvements and mentorship initiatives. Both women were energized by the opportunity to shape the next generation of combat aviators. Do you ever miss it? Amy asked suddenly. Flying combat missions, I mean. The adrenaline, the intensity of it all. Sarah considered the question carefully. Sometimes, there was a clarity to combat flying that's hard to replicate in civilian life. Your purpose was absolutely clear, and your actions had immediate, measurable impact. But I don't miss the stress, the constant danger, the toll it took on relationships and mental health. That's fair, Amy acknowledged. I feel the same way. I'm glad we did it, glad we proved what we could do. But I'm also glad to be in a position now where we can help others without putting ourselves directly in harm's way. Their conversation drifted to other topics: family, relationships, plans for the future. But underneath it all was the shared bond of their experiences, the knowledge that they had been tested in ways most people would never understand and had emerged stronger for it. The next morning, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Captain Jennifer Ross, the convoy commander they had rescued in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. Ross had been promoted to major and was now serving at the Pentagon, working on policy issues related to women in combat. "Sarah, I hope I'm not calling too early," Ross said. "I wanted to reach out because we're putting together a panel discussion on combat integration, and I immediately thought of you. Would you be willing to participate?" "What's the format?" Sarah asked. "It's going to be part of a symposium on military effectiveness and diversity. We'll have representatives from different services and different specialties talking about their experiences and what the data shows about integrated units. Your perspective as an Apache pilot who has actual combat experience would be invaluable." Sarah agreed without hesitation. This was exactly the kind of platform where she could make a real difference, where she could reach decision-makers who had the power to shape policy. The symposium was held at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. 2 months later. The audience included senior military officers, Defense Department officials, members of Congress, and military scholars. Sarah found herself on a panel with Ross, a female Marine infantry officer, and a Navy SEAL who had worked with female intelligence officers in combat zones. The discussion was substantive and occasionally contentious. Several audience members challenged the premise that women could be as effective as men in physically demanding combat roles. Sarah and her fellow panelists responded with data, personal experiences, and compelling arguments about the evolution of modern warfare. "The nature of combat has changed," Sarah explained during one exchange. "Yes, physical strength still matters in some contexts. But modern warfare increasingly relies on technical expertise, situational awareness, decision-making under pressure, and the ability to operate complex systems. These are areas where women have proven themselves to be equally capable." She went on to describe that mission in Helmand Province, but this time with more context about the technical and tactical challenges involved. Flying an Apache in combat requires you to process massive amounts of information simultaneously while making life-or-death decisions in seconds. You're coordinating with ground forces, monitoring multiple weapon systems, navigating in 3 dimensions, watching for threats, and executing precise maneuvers. Physical strength is relevant, but it's far from the most important factor. The Marine officer on the panel added her perspective. "I've led infantry patrols in Fallujah and Kandahar. The physical demands are real, absolutely. But I've also seen male Marines fail those same demands, and I've seen women exceed them. The key is setting clear, job-relevant standards and holding everyone to those standards regardless of gender." The discussion continued for over 2 hours, covering topics ranging from unit cohesion to equipment design to career progression policies. Sarah was impressed by the thoughtfulness of the questions and the genuine desire among many attendees to get it right, to build a military that was both maximally effective and truly inclusive. After the symposium concluded, Sarah was approached by a congresswoman who served on the House Armed Services Committee. "Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell, I found your comments today very compelling. I'd like to invite you to testify at a hearing we're planning on military readiness and personnel policies. Would you be willing to do that?" Sarah felt a surge of both excitement and nervousness. Congressional testimony was a significant responsibility, and her words would be part of the public record, potentially influencing legislation that would affect thousands of service members. "I would be honored," she replied. "What's the focus of the hearing?" "We're examining how well the military has integrated women into previously closed combat roles. We want to understand what's working, what's not, and what policy changes might be needed. We need voices like yours, people who have actually done the job at the highest level, to help us make informed decisions." Over the following weeks, Sarah prepared extensively for her congressional testimony. She reviewed studies on gender integration, analyzed data on performance and retention, and consulted with experts on military personnel policy. She also reached out to other female veterans to gather their perspectives and experiences. The day of the hearing arrived. Sarah sat at a long table facing the committee members, alongside several other witnesses, including military researchers and policy experts. Cameras recorded every word for broadcast and archival purposes. Her opening statement was carefully crafted to be both personal and data-driven. She began with her own story, then expanded to discuss the broader picture of women in combat aviation. She presented statistics showing that female pilots had comparable performance metrics to their male counterparts. She discussed the operational benefits of drawing from a larger talent pool. She addressed common concerns about physical standards and unit cohesion with evidence and examples. The question before this committee is not whether women can serve effectively in combat roles, Sarah concluded. The evidence clearly shows that they can and do. The question is whether our policies and culture fully support their success, or whether we're still allowing outdated assumptions and systemic barriers to limit our military's effectiveness. Every talented individual we discourage from serving, every capable soldier we fail to promote, every stereotype we allow to persist, makes us weaker as a nation. The questioning that followed was intense. Some committee members were supportive, asking Sarah to elaborate on her recommendations for policy improvements. Others were skeptical, pressing her on issues like physical standards and privacy concerns in integrated units. One congressman asked, Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell, some critics argue that the push for gender integration is driven by political correctness rather than military necessity. How would you respond to that? Sarah met his gaze directly. Congressman, I would ask those critics to explain how limiting our talent pool makes military sense. If we have talented individuals who meet the standards for a particular role, why would we exclude them based on gender? That's not political correctness. That's basic strategic logic. We want the best people in every position, and the best doesn't automatically mean male. Another committee member asked about her experience with discrimination and whether it had affected her performance or career progression. I'd be lying if I said I never faced discrimination or doubt, Sarah answered honestly. But I was fortunate to have strong leaders who cared more about my competence than my gender. Not every woman in the military has been that fortunate. We need to ensure that every service member is evaluated fairly, that harassment and discrimination are taken seriously and addressed promptly, and that talent is recognized and promoted regardless of gender. Sarah met with Gonzalez privately, listening to her experiences without judgment. Then, she worked with the chain of command to address the situation. The male students involved were called in for counseling, and when the behavior didn't stop, formal disciplinary action was taken. Sarah also arranged for Gonzalez to receive additional support from the base's Equal Opportunity Office. I almost didn't report it, Gonzalez confided during a follow-up meeting with Sarah. I was afraid it would make me look weak, like I couldn't handle the pressure. Reporting harassment isn't weakness, Sarah told her firmly. It's strength. You're not just standing up for yourself. You're helping to create an environment where future students won't have to deal with this nonsense. Gonzalez nodded, wiping away tears. Thank you for believing me and for taking action. A lot of people would have just told me to toughen up. That's not acceptable anymore, Sarah said. We're building a professional force based on mutual respect and competence, not tolerance of bad behavior. H declined most interview requests, uncomfortable with the spotlight. But she agreed to a few carefully selected appearances, including a spot on a military podcast and an interview with a magazine that focused on women in STEM fields. In each interview, she emphasized the same points: that capability matters more than gender, that training and dedication are what separate good pilots from great ones, and that the military is stronger when it draws from the full talent pool of the nation. She also made sure to credit the people she had served with. Captain Ross, who had kept her troops alive under impossible circumstances. Lieutenant Amy Chun, whose flying skills had kept them alive that day in Afghanistan. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, whose targeting precision had been absolutely critical. All the other women she had served alongside who had proven themselves time and time again. The response to these interviews was largely positive, though there was also backlash. Some people doubled down on their belief that women shouldn't serve in combat roles. Some accused Sarah of exaggerating her accomplishments or of being a pawn of political correctness. The negative comments stung, but Sarah had developed thick skin during her years of service. What bothered her more were the stories she heard from other female veterans. Women who had faced far worse discrimination than she had, who had been harassed or assaulted, whose careers had been derailed not by lack of ability, but by systemic bias. Sarah realized that her own experience, while challenging, had been relatively fortunate. She had strong commanders who supported her, talented crews who trusted her, and clear opportunities to prove herself in combat. In safe position, the soldiers on the ground were already low on ammunition and had taken casualties. They couldn't withstand another sustained assault. Sarah made her decision. Amy, get us in position for a hellfire shot on those vehicles. Maria, as soon as you have a lock, take them both. Both with one missile. Maria questioned. It wasn't impossible, but it would require perfect timing and positioning. If anyone can do it, you can, Sarah said with confidence. Amy swung the Apache around, climbing for altitude to give Maria a better angle. Through the targeting system, Sarah could see the two technical vehicles bouncing along the rough road, racing toward the convoy's position. I need them closer together, Maria muttered, her eyes locked on her display. Come on, come on. The vehicles were traveling in a line, about 50 meters apart, too far for a single missile to take them both. But the road ahead curved, forcing the vehicles to slow down and bunch up. Almost there, Maria said, her voice tight with concentration. 30 meters, 25, lock acquired. Firing. The last Hellfire missile leaped from its rail, streaking toward the lead vehicle. But Maria hadn't aimed at the vehicle itself. She had aimed at the road just in front of it, timing the impact for the exact moment when both vehicles would be closest together. As she drove home, Sarah reflected on the encounter. She hadn't planned to reveal her background, hadn't wanted to make a scene. But sometimes silence felt like complicity. Sometimes people needed to be confronted with the reality that their assumptions were wrong. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former co-pilot, Amy Chun. They kept in touch regularly, both having transitioned out of active duty around the same time. Saw you trending on Twitter. Coffee shop confrontation? Classic Sarah. Sarah groaned. Someone had recorded the encounter and posted it online. By the time she got home, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. The comments section was predictably divided, with some people praising her and others doubling down on Derek's original position. But mixed in with the arguments were comments from other female veterans, sharing their own stories. A Navy pilot who had flown combat missions in Syria, an Army officer who had led troops in Iraq, a Marine who had earned the Navy Cross for her actions under fire. Story after story of women who had served with distinction, whose capabilities had been questioned simply because of their gender. Sarah read through the comments, feeling a mixture of pride and frustration. Pride in the women who had served alongside her, who continued to prove themselves day after day. Frustration that they still had to prove themselves at all, that their competence was still questioned in ways that men's rarely were. She thought about that day in Helmand Province, the day she had mentioned to Derek. It had been one of the longest 8 minutes of her life. The radio chatter from the convoy had been desperate, the sound of gunfire nearly drowning out the voices. Captain Ross's calm commands, even as she directed her troops while wounded. The tension in the Apache's cockpit as they approached the kill zone. Amy's steady hands on the controls. Maria's focused voice as she called out targets.